To start the build off, we needed to remove a couple of screws from the body itself. Those were cut out with some flush cut pliers, and then the rest was sanded smooth with the rest of the body with a sanding stick. Since a lot of the parts on the body are separate pieces, like the front bumper, side skirts, even the vents, the doors, and the hood, I wanted to test fit a couple of pieces and all the underlying pieces first to see if I could glue them on. The front bumper needed one piece behind it, but actually you can just glue it in place first, and then the piece can still be glued easily from behind. Same goes for the vents on the side. You can just glue the main piece in, and then the vent can still be put in, even with the side skirt over it. Since I'm not a big fan of the opening doors on kits, as they usually don't fit back together really well once you try to close them, or actually don't fit at all, I decided to glue these shut. Yes, I know probably most of you won't like it, but that's just how it's gonna be, as I want a nice display piece and not a piece with an opening door that does not align once closed. So with that out of the way, all the parts and pieces that I tested before could now be glued in place with some super glue. Now that all the body parts that I wanted to glue to the body are glued to the body, I could move on to prepping the rest of the body for paint. Of course, I firstly marked off all of the mold lines with some of the excess plastic that isn't supposed to be there with a permanent marker, so I could clearly see where they are and don't forget them. And once I start sanding and removing the black marker, I have an indication of when that mold line is gone. The rough work with the sanding stick is now done. The mold lines are pretty much all gone, so I still needed to remove a couple of the deeper scratches that were left behind with a 600 grit sanding sponge from Tamiya. You could also just use some regular sandpaper, but I somehow like the feel of these sanding sponges a lot better, as they really contour to the body nicely. The entire body is now sanded and pretty much ready, only for the panel lines to be scribed with a panel line scriber, making them a bit wider and a bit deeper. I cleaned up the entire body, removing all of the dust, and then started with airbrushing all of the hard to reach, easy to forget spots first. There were a lot on this car, so I skipped that part in the primer, and then went over the rest of the body with a first light coat, then let it dry for about 5 to 10 minutes in between coats, and applied a couple more. After letting this first coat of primer dry, I set it aside for 5 to 10 minutes, then applied a second one, let it dry for about 45 minutes, and started sanding some of the imperfections out. There were still a couple of burrs that were left behind from the panel line scribing around some of these panel lines. I sanded those off, sanded the primer nice and smooth, and started applying 2 more coats of primer before I could move on to painting it in the color that I want it to be. After applying this coat of primer, you could see that most of the white plastic spots were now covered again. I let this coat sit and dry for about 5 to 10 minutes, leaving the paint in the airbrush and then just picking it back up after those 10 minutes of dry time, applying the final coat of primer, fully evening out the primer, making everything nice and gray and not having any of those bare plastic spots show through again. With this final coat of primer now applied, everything is nice and even, all the way covered, so I let it dry for about 60 minutes and then sanded everything smooth with a 3000 grit sanding sponge to get a super nice and tight finish all over in order for the color coat to lay down on it super smooth, and that also helps to get the final clear coat to lay down a lot smoother as well and get an overall better finish.